intense turbulence. The EU's institutions are an indispensable component of studying the EU. Their distinctive character as an amalgam of the collective and individual member state interests places them at the intersection of international and domestic politics. Together with organized interests, they are addressed in Part 3. Finally, in Part 4, we cover the key EU policy areas, internal and external. We consider the range of EU policy responsibilities, the different balances of EU and member state power across them, and the economic and political purposes of policies and the policy instruments deployed. These considerations set up chapters covering the internal market, monetary union, agriculture, environment and climate policy, justice and home affairs, trade and aid, foreign and security policy, and enlargement. This fifth edition of the book was written against the backdrop of the protractive process of the UK leaving the EU. The December 2019 election gave Prime Minister Johnson a clear majority so as to be able to complete the Brexit process at the end of January 2020, albeit with a transition period and the negotiation of a new British relationship with the EU to follow. The complexity of Brexit for British politics, its continued divisiveness and its challenge to the UK's territorial integrity was not fully anticipated at the time of the June 2016 referendum. Whilst the 27 EU member states were united in facing the challenge of Brexit, they have divisive issues of their own, including in relation to the refugee crisis, further reforms to put Eurozone governance on a more stable footing, and the task of transitioning to a zero-carbon economy by 2050. The approaching end of the Merkel era in German politics, the salience of populism in some states, and rule of law challenges in Central Europe are amongst challenges that the EU will face in the coming period. Together, these factors will intersect to shape the impact of the UK's departure on the EU 27. There will, therefore, be much more for students and instructors to explore in the period ahead. Given our aspiration to be comprehensive and up-to-date with this co-authored textbook on the EU, so the authorship team has evolved to meet the challenge. We welcome Charlotte, Charlie Burns to the team for this edition. Simon, Owen and Charlotte have taken the lead with this edition, with Ian and Stephen having already invested much in the book, in addition to acting as reviewers of the new material. Late news page. The COVID-19 pandemic and the EU. At the time of writing, in April 2020, it was becoming increasingly clear that the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic constituted a major crisis for the EU. Rapidly rising death tolls, at first in Italy and Spain, made for grim reading. Government lockdowns aimed at limiting the spread of the virus were having an enormous economic impact throughout the EU and far beyond, and the social and political consequences were already starting to be felt. Early EU responses. On the 26th of March 2020, the new Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, lamented that, when Europe really needed an all-for-one spirit, too many initially refused to share their umbrella. Indeed, at the end of February and in early March, as the situation quickly deteriorated in Italy, member state responses consisted mainly of closing borders and seeking to manage the crisis at the national level. The Schengen free travel area covering much of continental Europe was effectively suspended. That said, by mid-March the EU had begun to play a role. It led joint efforts